few moments this morning peering through Alice's looking glass. That is to say, we are going to take a closer look at what is real through the lens of what is not. I want you to think for a moment of a grape popsicle. Now, I know on such a frigid morning, a frozen concoction like that might not seem very appealing unless you are a 6-year-old. But just humor me for a minute. I want you to imagine the way that grape popsicle tastes. Forget about the coldness and the wetness of it. I want you to focus specifically on the flavor. The grape flavor. If I put that flavor into a purple jelly bean, you would identify it as grape, right? Or purple gum, same thing. And a purple drink, like Kool-Aid. If I blindfolded you and gave you a taste test of drinks to compare orange and cherry, even without seeing the purple color, when you tasted that, you would say, grape. And when was the last time that you ate a grape? You know, that spherical fruit with or without seeds, with that juicy flesh beneath the thin skin of green or red. When was the last time you ate one of those that tasted like that? The answer, of course, is never. The flavor that we have come to associate with all things grape is actually a chemical compound known as methylenphthalate. Yum. And although it is chemically a cousin to the natural flavoring of Concord grapes, it is in fact an artificial concoction. Now, despite the fact that I've always wanted to take a food science course, we're going to leave our food exploration there. My message for today instead will hopefully cause us to pay a little more attention to the difference between the real and the artifice in our lives. I think it is a highly relevant topic in our modern times, whether or not Beyoncé lip-synced the Star-Spangled Banner at the presidential inauguration. Unless you live your life under a rock, you are confronted daily with the artificial posing as the real. Every supermarket checkout stand is overrun with supermodels and Hollywood stars airbrushed into non-real perfection. Even respectable television networks like Discovery and PBS have tripped the light fandango with reality shows that offer us life as it really happens, except that it is completely scripted and edited for our consumption. I hope that's not news to you. Our social media personas have become our own personal interstate billboards, advertising the best of our lives, our professional triumphs, our attractive profile pictures, our cute kids, our pious convictions, all the while conveniently ignoring the ugly, the banal, and the boring reality of our lives. In the best of all circumstances, we are aware of the artificial usurping the real, and we accept it because on some level we like it that way. In the worst case scenario, we have become so desensitized to synthetic reality that we can't even tell the difference anymore between what is authentic and what is merely plastic. So what's the big deal anyway? Is artificial reality really that harmful to us? I think that the answer is yes, and I have a few reasons for that. But before I explain myself further, I want us to ground our exploration in Scripture. That may seem like a curious enterprise because the issue at hand seems so 21st century. After all, there was precious little photoshopping going on in first century Palestine. But that doesn't mean the impulse to to choose the palatable but phony over the messy but real is a new phenomenon in the human experience. And so our scripture for today, from the Gospel of Luke in the 4th chapter. He came to Nazareth where he had been reared. As he always did on the Sabbath, he went to the meeting place. When he stood up to read, he was handed the scroll of the prophet Isaiah. Unrolling the scroll, he found the place where it was written, "God's Spirit is upon me. He's chosen me to preach the message of good news to the poor, sent me to announce pardon to prisoners and recovery of sight to the blind, to set the burdened and battered free, to announce this is God's year to act." He rolled up the scroll, handed it back to the assistant, and sat down. Every eye in the place was on him intent. Then he started in. "You've just heard scripture make history. It came true just now in this place." All who were there watching and listening were surprised at how well he spoke. But they also said, "Isn't this Joseph's son, the one we've known since he was a youngster?" He answered, "I suppose you're going to quote the proverb, 'Doctor, go heal yourself. Do here in your hometown what we heard you did in Capernaum.' Well, let me tell you something. No prophet is ever welcomed in his hometown. Isn't it a fact that there were many widows in Israel at the time of Elijah during that 3.5 years of drought when famine devastated the land? But the only widow to whom Elijah was sent was in Sarepta in Sidon. And there were many lepers in Israel at the time of the prophet Elisha, but the only one cleansed was Naaman the Syrian." That set everyone in the meeting place seething with anger. They threw him out, banishing him from the village, then took him to a mountain cliff at the edge of the village to throw him to his doom. But he gave them the slip and was on his way. So Jesus saunters into Nazareth to see what his hometown will make of him. I picture him cautious but optimistic, not really looking for a fight, but knowing that his reputation precedes him. A lot has changed since his last trip home, and it's hard to know what kind of reception he will get. Now, you've got to do a little bit of reading between the lines on this story as we get it from Luke. The scripture Jesus quotes from the sacred scroll of Isaiah is certainly one that would have been familiar to his audience. The fact that Jesus chooses this scripture would not have been particularly shocking to them. And although they might have thought him a bit arrogant to suggest it, the fact that Jesus is implying a direct correlation between Isaiah's prophecy and himself wouldn't have rattled them much. What would have been jarring to them is the words that Jesus says after he sits down. "You've just heard scripture make history. It came true just now in this place." By using the present perfect tense in Greek, as Luke does, he captures exactly the tension and the immediacy of this moment. The Jewish audience gathered in the synagogue that day would have been very comfortable in the realms of the past and the future. They revered their sacred history, and they pined for their as-yet unrevealed future. For a Jewish audience, God's action was almost always something that had either already happened or was yet to happen. For this upstart Jesus to suggest that God's activity, God's revelation is now, would have felt uncomfortably close and demanding. Jesus, of course, knows his neighbors better than they know themselves. And so with the very next breath, he anticipates what they will want from him, which is proof. And not just any proof. They've heard of his healing miracles, the ones he performed in Capernaum. But Jesus is having none of that. He refuses to play the part of the rock star Messiah. You know, the one with moves like Mick Jagger. Jesus knows that whipping out a few miracles out of his hat wouldn't really prove anything other than his own capacity to be an attention-seeking show-off. Instead, he keeps their attention squarely focused on the issues at hand, namely the radical love and justice of his message. To do this, he evokes images of Elijah and Elisha, not performing feats of prophetic glory, and there were plenty of examples of those. But instead, these two ancient prophets ministering to the least of these.